Welcome to the Autoblog podcast. I'm Greg Migliore. We have a great show for you today. We're going to talk about the Bronco, the Mustang Mach 1, the Viper, yes, the Viper, the Corvette Z06, Tesla, and Fox Body Mustangs, maybe a couple other things. So yeah, that's got to make you want to download the show or listen to this wherever you get your podcasts. So hey, that's quite the rundown. Let's bring in Associate Editor Byron Hurd. What's going on, man?
Hey, how's it going? It's been it's been a busy few weeks. It feels like everything's getting back to normal, and we're all over the place, which is good and stressful in some ways. But so far so good.
Yeah, it's there's a lot going on. Actually, last night I was drinking a beer that I have not had in a while. It was called a Shorts Local Light, and it's sort of like a light beer, but also from Shorts, which does kind of like craft beer thing. I believe they're a Michigan beer. Just kind of randomly picked up a 12er. It's a good summer beer. So
Nice.
That's, kind of the July feeling, good lager to beat the heat.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
what are you drinking these days? Just curious.
I took a trip out East Coast over the weekend just to visit some friends. It's my birthday week, so I was trying to get a little downtime basically. And I was having some Heavy Seas, which is some DC, Baltimore area stuff.
Yeah.
They have an IPA line called Loose Cannon. They have a bunch of tropical versions of it. So we decided to be summery and go with the Tropicannon just to have a little fun. So it was a hearty beer for, it's summery-ish because it's kind of fruity, but also it's not at all. It's, a hoppy IPA, but no complaints.
IPAs I like them, but I also like to choose them wisely, if you will. Sometimes you got to be careful. The high ABV on a high temperature, you mix those, they could get a little bit tricky. So
Yeah.
Anyways, let's get into the Bronco. It's
All right.
very exciting for me because I got to drive it and I had a lot of opinions about it. But it's fun whenever you drive a new vehicle, an important new vehicle. You can actually bounce ideas off of somebody else, like agree, disagree. Like we both drove it like 3 weeks apart. That's actually somewhat rare. A lot of times we drive a car, then nobody gets into it for like 3 months or something. So This is kind of cool that we can say, hey, 3 weeks later, let's talk about it. My piece went up on Thursday. If you're listening to this over the weekend, head back, check it out. I've got some videos. I drove a first edition on-road and a Badlands off-road. So 4-door and a 2-door. I tried the 2.7 liter V6, which I think is a pretty good engine. I kind of my thoughts are all over the place, and I actually arrived at a little bit of a conclusion, which we could get to in a bit. But overall, I think just right away it lived up to the hype. Maybe you thought the same thing. I was ready to sort of go two ways, either to be blown away or to be kind of like, oh, geez, this is not what I thought it would be, So, to sum it up real quickly, it did live up to the hype.
Oh, that's good. Well, it's also great that you actually got, sounds like, more time with the V6 because all of my on-road time was with the 4-cylinder. Which was a very good engine, but I just I was thinking in my head what is the car that people are most likely to buy? What's the one that's going to be like the typical street driver's Bronco, right? And so I went for the 2.3 liter and the 4-door in a I can't remember what it was off the top of my head. I believe it was an Outer Banks, which was kind of equivalent to a Sahara when it comes to a Jeep Wrangler. So I was trying to stick it in that kind of lane and see how it went. I only really got to play with the V6 once we got it off road, which. When you got it in 4-low and you got all that torque, anything works pretty well in that situation. But that thing was a beast.
Yeah, it's interesting because I only got to drive the V6. I would have liked to have had a little bit of time in the 2.3 liter 4, but good engines. We're pretty familiar with both of these engines. That was one part I thought that was interesting as we get more into this. It sort of came through in the interior. The Bronco is very much a Ford. It's not like a Bronco that's owned by Ford. You get in there and it's like, oh, that's like a Ford switch. That's a Ford. There's Sync 4. Here's the Ford engines that are used in, a variety of things. Good engines too, but, there's very much that common familiarity, which was a good thing. But sometimes you do get into these vehicles like, I expect maybe the Hummer will be this way. It's going to be almost its own thing
Yeah.
versus a GM, but you never know. It's interesting to see how much these cars do end up reflecting their like corporate, like hierarchy.
Yeah.
I actually kind of thought, this is kind of a nuanced opinion, and maybe we could get into it as we go through the different parts of the Bronco. I actually thought the two engines that you could get in the Bronco individually and on paper are essentially better than their FCA Stellantis counterparts, if you will. They outgun them with premium fuel. I should qualify that. Although even without, I believe the Turbo 4 is like 5 horsepower less than the Stellantis Turbo 4. So even with that, it's still like close. And then with premium fuel, they do beat them on paper. Doesn't always mean anything, especially in a vehicle like this. But I thought those two engines really shined quite well, if you will. But on balance, just all the engines you could get in the Wrangler. I mean, to me, it's like, how do you not give like the point to Jeep for that? A V8, an eco diesel, the 4xe. Like, I mean, pick your poison here. So, I guess, like I was going to say, if you're scoring, I kind of give the Wrangler that round.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, if you just want a standard 4-cylinder or V6, like you need to get the right engine for you. And if you are like maybe a little like more agnostic when it comes to these brands, which I don't honestly know who would do that, but if you were like going to go with a score sheet, you might say, a little more horsepower. I think I like this V6 better than the Pentastar. So that's where I think you might decide, if you're in the market for an off-roader, that the Ford engine could be right for you, because individually they're better.
Yeah, and you got to figure, I mean, that the V6 that Ford's offering is, I mean, it really slots in a little bit closer to like the EcoDiesel or the 4xe in the Jeep, where it's premium, where the Pentastar V6 is, I mean, a lot of Jeep owners just kind of look at that as the standard engine. Like it's the simplest engine they offer in that car. I mean, I guess you could argue that the 392's 6.4 is the simplest engine, but that's a weird tangent we don't need to go off on. But it's the proven, known, basic V6 that Chrysler offers now, or Stellantis, whatever you want to call it. But for Jeep, that's kind of been the floor for a while, and for a while it was also the ceiling. So it's nice just to see that Jeep has a lot of different choices. And I also have to give them credit in their manual transmission offerings too, because if you do want to stick, you're much better off getting a Wrangler than you are a Bronco, because you have more engine trim and other option package choices with a Jeep than you do with a Bronco when it comes to a stick shift, because you can't even get that if you once you go up to the V6, the 7-speed's gone. So, that's one thing to kind of consider if you are in that position to be cross shopping, or if you're, as I pointed out before, really wanting a Bronco and just having trouble justifying the price, but you need a car now and you'd rather get a Wrangler and just cruise with that for a while until the Bronco market kind of settles down.
It's an interesting point. Which manual do you prefer, Wrangler or Bronco?
Actually, I think that's kind of a toss-up. The crawler gear in the Bronco is really neat. It's a cool feature, and it's one that is useful in a few applications. If you're off-roading and you don't want it to be in 4-low for whatever reason, but you do need to drive quite slowly, then you've got that. You can leave it in high and put it in the crawl gear and tool along at 1 or 2 miles an hour and still use the brakes without stalling the engine. Like it's really handy, but it's not make or break. And in terms of just general feel and all that, they're honestly both very good manual gearboxes, considering they're in a truck, basically. I mean, that's what they are. And especially going from the last generation Wrangler's 6-speed to the current one is night and day. I mean, it's enormously better. So, it's not sports car short throws or anything like that, but it's if you got out of a Miata and got into the Jeep, the experience would at least feel similar. Whereas before it was the difference between an actual gearbox and stirring a bucket of rocks. So
I actually found the 10-speed automatic transmission to be basically everything I kind of wanted in the Bronco. I thought that was, I love driving manual transmission vehicles, but I honestly think if I were going to buy a Bronco, even if I were going to do some serious off-roading where I wanted that true engagement when you're crawling over things, I don't know, the manual just, it adds a layer to it that I kind of like the 10-speed. It's a good transmission. Ford and General Motors use that transmission in a variety of things. So, yeah. But
if you go with the 10-speed and one of the more like off-roady trims too, you also get the one-pedal driving. Did you get to try that out at all?
I did. That's actually a really interesting point. I was ready to not like it. I was like going down a hill, and it was one of those things where, like, I tested this at Hollyoaks, which is I almost said amusement park. It is off-road park, maybe an hour north of Detroit. Hills are pretty big. It's like an old like gravel pit or quarry or something. Long story short, the hills going up and down are pretty healthy. So we had like a Ford spotter guide kind of just like doing the lead. And he's like, yeah, I know. This is the time to try one pedal. And I'm thinking to myself, basically, I'm going to go straight down to the point where I almost felt like I needed a parachute or something. But long story short, it works quite well. It essentially, like, unless you're hitting the gas, the car is braking. So you have all of this control, which I found to be really clever, really more, I would say, like supportive than I would have thought. Even when you're going down a hill and like literally, you ever see those old like World War I film things where the planes, the double winger planes are like spiraling to the ground. And it's like, that's literally how this felt, is like, you're going straight down.
Yeah.
That's a long-winded way again of saying, hey, yeah, I thought one pedal was really cool. I thought it worked really well.
The first time you kind of like, you fully release it and the vehicle does stop cold and you're like, oh, okay, I can trust this. It will actually stop the car. And after that, it kind of eases your mind a little bit, and it becomes really intuitive. I mean, you get to the point where it's like you're driving a car that's permanently in the lowest possible gear, no matter what speed you're going. And so, you lift your foot off and the engine responds immediately. The brakes kick in as soon as it's necessary. Like, it's like driving, I mean, like we had the Bolt EV, which we're going to get to talk about here in a little bit. That's one of those cars where it almost felt like a hot hatch when you got it back on the corners, because, it'd be feeling like you're driving along in like second gear. You release the pedal and the engine braking kicks in. It's the same exact feeling in the EV, only without the obnoxiously loud engine screaming back at you because you're engine braking at high revs. So it's pretty cool.
I think the tools they offer you are really good. Like, you, in one of your articles, I think you made a point of saying that the Bronco is like a weapon in the hands of, I forget if your point was like an experienced off-roader or anybody, but I think both points actually hold true. Like, if you're even halfway good off-road, the Bronco makes you just like amazing. And even if you're not that good, the Bronco makes you pretty good.
Yeah.
It's really a capable vehicle. And the tools, like I said, are interesting. I thought the trail cam was pretty neat. I put that into my like nice to have bucket. Like, I don't know if I would pay for it, but if it was on like a trim I wanted, or that was the only one that was available, and again, the Bronco is going to have some probably availability issues for a year or two, maybe. I wouldn't say no to it. It ended up being pretty cool. You could see like what's in front of you and the branches kind of whipping by you. So I ended up liking that too.
Yeah, it helps a lot, especially because that hood is, I mean, there's quite a bit of it. It sticks out a decent amount. And even though you have the little like trail sights on the side of it that kind of show you where your corners are, that space between the leading edge of the hood and the ground is a mystery to you once you get close enough to it. And the trickier course that we took at the off-rodeo in Texas when I drove it last month, there were parts where I was driving a base model Bronco that happened to have the Sasquatch package added onto it. So we didn't have the fancy trail cams or anything like that. And there were some times on that trail where we were rock crawling and I had my nose in the air so far that the only thing I could see out of my front or even my driver's side window was clear blue sky. So once I got hung up on any of those obstacles, I needed somebody to come spot for me. If I had had the trail cam, I wouldn't have needed a spotter. So they tell you if you're going off-roading, the first thing you need is someone to go off-roading with. So you really shouldn't be doing this kind of serious stuff solo. But if you're the type of person who just has to do that, like you dig that challenge of not having a guide, of not having a spotter, it's a really neat feature, and it's one you miss after you tried it out and you move to a vehicle that doesn't have it. Because every other car I'd driven that day had it, and I got really used to it. It's kind of like a crutch. And then when it wasn't right there in front of me, I was like, I was a little paralyzed by the lack of information after having access to so much of it. So,
yeah, that's a really good point. They have this mountain. I'm forgetting the name of it. Mount Magna, I think, is what it's called, and it's supposed to replicate Moab or the face of the moon. I don't know, pick your whatever. It doesn't quite do that. But I read somewhere it goes up to like 9,000 feet or something, which is not nothing. And when your Bronco is going straight up and all you're seeing is that, it's nice to have that kind of extra set of eyes, literally, because you're like, what is like the inflection point where you're going to like start coming down? And all of this just kind of reminded me how much I like off-roading, how fun it is, how it's just a riot,
Yeah.
But yeah, off-roading, it's like I wrote in my piece, and I think you kind of reflected this too. This is one of like 3 or 4, 5 maybe vehicles you could basically drive up a wall in. Like there's only so many vehicles you could do some of the crazy things that this lets you do. The Bronco, the Wrangler, the G-Class you definitely run the risk of breaking something very expensive. And even the 4Runner is bigger and doesn't fit in some of the spaces as well as some of these, these 3. And again, the Defender sort of falls in between top trim Wrangler, Bronco, and then Mercedes territory. So I don't know. To me, the Defender felt much more like a little more of like mainstream SUV, which some Defender people may say, hey, I don't know how I feel about that, but I don't know. It's definitely not a Wrangler or a Bronco, in this segment.
It's the refinement level that really gets it. Even the 4Runner and the Land Cruiser and all those that, fundamentally underneath are very capable vehicles. They've had a little bit of their edge taken away in the name of sales volume. And now, I say that knowing full well that was part of Ford's approach to Bronco with the independent front suspension. I mean, granted, they already had that platform in the Ranger, so it was kind of inevitable at that point. But, I mean, that's a big nod to on-road refinement right there that takes away some of the harder edge of the Bronco, which it, hasn't really had since it was discontinued in, 1996 or whatever. So, yeah, it's weird. Like, everything is some degree of compromise when you're talking about a mass market vehicle. So, nothing will really ever be perfect, but we've got 2 available is the wrong word to use. We have 2 mainstream, affordable, ostensibly off-road cars that are very competitive with each other, which, we don't need to declare an absolute winner and an absolute loser. It's really nice just to have the choice, frankly.
I agree. I think, you could literally go on looks and say, hey, I've always loved the old look of those old Broncos. I love those oval headlights that just recall that like the 60s into the 70s look. And say, hey, this is what I want. You could make your decision that way and put everything else aside. You could say, I'm a Jeep person. I'm doing that. Like it's entirely reasonable because the differences are so nuanced, if you will. I mean, one of them is the independent front suspension, which to me, that was where I saw a little bit of daylight between these two. Is the Bronco is a lot. No, I want to back that up. Not a lot, but it's easier to drive. It's less work to drive. Let me put it that way. And I don't think that takes away from its edge. I know some of the more like primitive, like underpinnings of the Wrangler maybe help it off road, but not in a way that I could ever really prove the difference. And again, I'm not like some off-road guru, but I also I've done a few things. I'm probably going to push, if I were to own a Bronco or a Wrangler, I'm going to push it more than your average owner is going to.
Yeah.
There's some real off-roadies who could probably find that difference. But I mean, again, to your point, the compromise, I mean, just driving up and down the roads, because we had like an hour plus drive it's not nearly as like, oh wow, I'm a little tired, like you get with the Wrangler.
Yeah,
So I mean, to me, that's an easy like, yeah, the Bronco rides a little bit better,
yeah,
steers a little bit better.
absolutely. And this is the part where I feel like I have to remind the listeners that I own a Jeep Wrangler. I have driven it basically across the country in stretches, and I know what I'm talking about when it comes to on-road comfort in a vehicle like that. And the Bronco takes that without even there's no hesitation or second guessing there. It's night and day practically.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I'm trying to think what else I want to throw in here about the Bronco. It's yeah, I mean, I would say this, like to kind of like sort of bring it all together, my like verdict, and I really hedged on this. I didn't declare like this isn't like a Supreme Court decision. What I kind of wrote was based on like how I feel right now, having driven Broncos for a decade and a half, Wranglers for a decade and a half plus in this business, and then having driven this new Bronco, the new one feels like a touch ahead of it. And some of that is, I will freely admit, almost being a prisoner of the moment. You know, there's a new Bronco. How do you not like it? You know, but my conclusion is, and I mean, to back it up a little bit, it does drive a little better on road. Individually, some of its engines are better on paper. I would give the design interior to Jeep. I give the powertrain portfolio to Jeep. I give almost like the idea of an off-roader to Jeep. You know, a couple other intangibles, maybe go to Bronco. It's so close. You know, this is like an overtime or a tie that goes to overtime, you know. But I would say right now, if I were going to like say which one feels a little bit better, I would lightly give it a head to Bronco.
Yeah.
And again, I don't think there has to be like a true winner and loser on this one. It's not even like, I would say sometimes when we do say a Camaro versus Mustang versus Challenger drive, we will like pick a winner and say this, and this. To me, it's like if somebody said you got to like put points and numbers by what you're saying, I would really struggle to do that.
Yeah.
But just back to back driving them, I would give a slight edge to Ford right now. So I don't know. I mean, I think I know how you feel, but that's where I landed.
I mean, yeah, it's basically the same way I feel. I mean, it would be one thing to say, okay, yeah, I mean, like right now in this moment, if we grant nobody any benefit of the doubt that the Bronco is the better vehicle, but that's, you know, that by itself doesn't carry a whole ton of weight. It's a pretty narrow margin, and Jeep's going to respond quickly because it's Jeep. I mean, this was their segment for a long time, and Ford would like you to believe that they caught Jeep completely flat-footed and they didn't see any of this coming, and there's, you know, it's going to take forever to Jeep to catch up. No, I mean, let's be honest. It'll take a mid-cycle refresh for Jeep to get itself back in the running, and you can't, you know, you can hang it on the independent front suspension if that's something you really, really care about. Obviously, Jeep is not in a position to address that particular component of the Wrangler's architecture in the short term. And honestly, I'm not sure they'd want to in the long term. I almost feel like now it's kind of an identity thing for them. So it's, you know, it's one of those situations where like the real winner is whichever one you can get at the price you can afford in the spec you want when you want it. And right now, almost every single one of those comparisons is going to go to Jeep because they exist. And that's that's a trump card. So
Yeah, no, well said. I think it'll also be interesting to see when some of like the Broncos like safety ratings come out, things like that. Yeah, the presentation I went to, they were very, you know, excited, if you will, about some of the different like the airbag layouts, things like that. So, I mean, all that stuff factors in. So, yeah, I mean, it's sort of like a stalemate where somebody wins a little bit on points or something. You know, I don't know.
Yeah, a victory by decision, not by knockout.
There you go. Yeah. All right. That's the Bronco. That, you know, if you did miss the show we did about 3 weeks ago, we actually put it out around the 4th of July, so you may have missed it. Go back, check that out. You know, I hope you're enjoying whatever drink you're enjoying on the patio for Bronco, because, you know, obviously it's fun to talk about. Let's shift gears over to the Mustang Mach 1. Obviously, that is quite the thing to have in your driveway for a little bit.
Yeah.
What did you do with that?
So unfortunately, we had some bad weather last week, so getting it out, when it worked with my schedule was actually kind of tricky. But so the one that I had, it's important to note this. The Mach 1 is essentially a crossbreed between a Shelby GT350 and last year's Mustang Bullet, because you get the manual transmission and the chassis setup and the tire options that the GT350 offered, but you get the standard 5-liter engine, standard, if there is such a thing, and the otherwise kind of normal Mustang GT interior exterior treatments and stuff like that. And obviously you don't get a Shelby badge with it. So this is essentially like the opportunity to build the ultimate track focused Mustang GT. And that's exactly how Ford delivered it to me. And I think we had Riswick over on the West Coast just also had a Mach 1. And his was the 10-speed automatic and didn't have the Recaro seats. And I don't believe it had what I'm going to call the R package tires, because when it was the GT350, it was the GT350R. They got the Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2s, which are the big, crazy semi-slicks that I think are like, I don't know, maybe 305s in the rear and like 285 in front or something like that. They're wide. They have virtually no tread on them. They're just designed to go really fast on a racetrack. And so that's the car that I was given to drive in a week where we had more thunderstorms than I can count. So it got exciting at times because I did actually take it out in the rain. It did a lot better than I thought it would in the rain, in its defense. But this car puzzles me a little bit the way it was spec'd, because I drove a GT350 just like less than a year ago, and it was an R model, and so it had the same tires. It worked. That formula worked better on the GT350 than it works on the Mach 1. And I think the reason why really comes down to the wheel and tire package, so this has the Magna Ride adaptive suspension system on it. And I left it in comfort for the most part because this is Detroit. And in comfort, it was especially exaggerated just how much those tires tramline on the road. And so when you have the big heavy wheels that you get on the Mach 1 relative to the R, because the R had those crazy fancy carbon wheels, which were nice and lightweight, and that was the beauty of them. The wheels on this are heavy, and the tires are constantly following every imperfection in the road. So that means the entire chassis is just yanking you around. I mean, if you made a lane change, even just going over the very fine humps in the road in between lanes where the asphalt hasn't settled as much, felt like climbing over something in the Mach 1, where the wheel would catch it, it would be like, oh, okay, this is the way we're going. And if you took one hand off the steering wheel as you were changing lanes, the entire car would actually turn and wobble back and forth as you were driving over it. It would look like you were like looking at your phone or drunk or something like that. It was a pretty significant like grip that the car had on you as a driver, which kind of threw me off. The GT350R felt a lot lighter on its feet, like it wanted to change direction quickly, even on roads that were kind of beat up. And I think it was the lack of unsprung weight that the Mach 1 has. And it felt like more purpose-built. This just feels like, okay, we want to make sure we retain the capability that the GT350R had to some extent, even though we're not offering it anymore. So we'll throw it all at the 5-liter and hope it sticks. And when you get out on a nice, smooth, flat road, you've got some room to run. That thing is fantastic. Sounds great. The Tremec gearbox that's in there I had the manual, I felt fine about the old GetDrag 6-speed gearbox that they had in the regular 5-liter. Like, I had one of those in my 2015 Mustang GT myself. I never had any gripes with that transmission. I know many people have. But it does feel a little lighter. It's a little less mechanical, I guess, of a feel than you get with the Tremec, and a lot of people prefer the Tremec for that reason. I mean, I think it's kind of a toss-up. I was expected to be kind of disappointed by it because I enjoyed the old one so much, but it actually, I didn't even think about it after 2 minutes of driving. I was focused so much on just trying to keep the thing pointed straight that it didn't really lean on the transmission as much as I thought it would. So, I mean, it's a cool car. It's got tons of presence. It sounds amazing. And it is a blast when you have the opportunity to exploit it. But for the average buyer who just wants a nice canvas to work with, a regular 5-liter GT will do you just fine.
Yeah, I think you've got to really be a little bit of a track demon to want this car. You need to maybe also be a really big, Mustang Mach 1 fan, perhaps, too. I mean, it's got a great somewhat like it's almost like a deep cut in the Mustang like catalog. It's definitely not the top 3 or 4 that you might think of, other than if you're like almost like a Mustang historian, even though it is a very iconic, name, if you will. But you really gotta like almost like have a track membership or hit a lot of track days to me to sort of justify why you would want this car. And that's not, I'd say that's a neutral opinion. I'm not saying don't get it. Like if that's you, go get this thing if that's what you want. But I think you could get a lot of Mustang that will do everything you want it to do. Would probably be a lot more livable than almost any other, than anything but the Mach 1,
Yeah,
So,
well, and especially for a lot less money, because the way mine was equipped, I mean, $64,000 and change for the way this thing was set up, and you can buy a lot of used GT350 for $64,000. In fact, you could buy an entire used GT350 and put it in a garage and then spend $20,000 on a Ford Maverick and drive that every day. So, like, it's a big ask, but for the person who wants like what is now the ultimate normally aspirated Mustang, that's it. There's no GT350 anymore, so that's your choice. And the next tier up from that is going to be a GT500, and those are very different vehicles. So it's if you just want the most you can get out of the regular 5-liter, then this is the choice. And it's not a bad one. It's just it's going to cost you, and you're going to have to live with the compromises.
I mean, I think you also the Mach 1 name could really resonate with some people in the way that like just that sort of like history drenched name can, resonate with people in any field, like whether it's watches, cars, whatever, you name it.
Yeah.
But, outside of that, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, at this point, we've already done Bullet and now Mach 1 for this generation and GT350R. And we've got to be getting to a point. I mean, this Mustang was new in 2015. We've got to be getting kind of close to the point where they're going to shake it up and it maybe not completely redesign it, because that doesn't really seem to be what anybody's doing with sporty cars these days. But we're at least going to get a fairly comprehensive overhaul. So this might be the last quote unquote special Mustang we see before this generation's done. So that might be a consideration for some shoppers too, who, kind of want to get into this before maybe something happens to the Mustang that they're not going to be as on board with whenever it does get redesigned.
That's actually a really interesting point, because the Mustang, since, in some ways, since they brought back the very retro, like pony car style, like 15, 16 years ago, it looks a lot different than it did back then. But each individual phase, generation, iteration has been pretty subtle. A lot of times you can see the difference even side by side. And right now, I think this, my take is just stylistically, they've done like everything they could do to it right now. It's like, frankly, it's like a menacing looking car, even in base trim. There's a lot going on. I don't honestly know what the next move is. Go back to Fox bodies? I don't know. We'll tease out the spend my money, which involves a Fox body.
There you go.
So let's talk Chevy Bolt, which I almost always say Volt on like every single time. Fun trivia note. I was at the reveal of the Bolt back whenever that was. Pretty sure Mary Barra said Volt at first too. Or maybe it could have even been Bob Lutz. I don't think it was Bob Lutz. But like literally people have been tripping over Volted Bolt for like quite some time. I digress. I really like the Bolt. I think it's it's a good EV. I think it accomplishes its mission, if you will, for Chevy and for General Motors, which is to bring like an attainable EV to the masses. It's pretty affordable. General Motors, I believe, is out of their full $7,500 tax credit, but they dropped the price about $5,000, a little bit more than that. So it's kind of right where where it was as far as prices, and maybe you even like that because you're not having to wait until you do your taxes to save that money. You can just save it up front, and then who knows, maybe get some other incentives. So yeah, I do like the Bolt. I think I think it. They've done some things to it for the refresh here that, frankly, it looks a little bit like a Tesla up front. I noticed it in my driveway. It's like, oh, this looks a lot cooler than the last gen did. Otherwise, it's fairly subtle changes. The mileage, like the range, actually slightly went down, I believe, not in any noticeable way. But they did some things. I think they added to like equipment, things like that might reduce range a little bit. 259 for the electric car, which is what I had. 250 and even 250 for the EUV, which is 6 inches longer. That's the new addition to the lineup. A little bit more of a true crossover type thing, which honestly to me that's the car. That's the one that I think you're going to get people into.
Yeah.
Like I said, I really enjoyed driving the Bolt. It's a fun little hatchback in the way that fun little hatchbacks are fun. It handles great. The steering's dialed in. You're low to the ground. It feels quick.
Yeah.
I was excited about it. But the one sort of downside is I'm like, man, this thing's small. I was driving up 75 in the rain, and I was like, probably the same like rainstorm you were trying to, navigate the Mach 1 in and holding on for dear life.
Yeah.
But it's like, this is cool. And this can work on the coasts, I think. But like sort of in like the Midwest where everybody drives like a Tahoe or something, you kind of like, I think people want a little more car around them. And that's where, maybe the EUV can, get some people who might be cross shopping things like, I don't know, an Equinox or something. You're like, well, hey, what's this? It's an EV.
Yeah.
Okay. So, overall good, but it is a little small, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think the EUV is a big grab for GM. I'd like to see that do well. I'd like to see them really kind of make a good effort with the next generation of the Bolt 2, whenever that's due up, because I'm starting to reach the point where that's going to be ready for redesign here pretty soon too. And especially as quickly as EV technology is changing, it would be nice to see what GM can do with their next effort, because the first one was very good. And I agree with you that the EUV is what they need to get the volume I think that they're going for. And I just like to, but people always seem to forget that the Bolt exists, frankly. And I don't think GM gets credit for doing as well with it as they did.
It's a very credible electric vehicle. The interior is nice. They moved away from like the pod-like setting, which is what Green editor John Snyder wrote in his buying guide of the new Bolts, if you will. I totally agree with that. It's like cleaner, but also more upscale, but also kind of more futuristic, because it's like all the like weird, clunky Chevy things that are normally in there, they're not in the Bolt. It's like screens and then like soft touch materials. And the one I had a really nice, clean black interior. Literally, I'm not even kidding. It was one of the nicer Chevy interiors I've been in quite some time. Yeah. So, I mean, to me, that's not backhanded praise. That's good job, Chevy. The Bolt is a very, that looks like a Tesla fighting interior. Absolutely. Maybe even better. I've been in Tesla interiors that you're like, knocking on panels. You're like, oh, that's a piece of crap. What is that? So,
right.
So yeah, very credible EV. I think the real secret sauce, though, is they want to probably move this up into like the Equinox territory is still ostensibly called a compact.
Right.
Sure. I mean, it seems like every crossover is, one size up from what it once was as far as dimensions. But if you could get like an equinized, wow, I just made up that word, sized crossover that used Bolt powertrain, well, hey, there you go. Yeah. I mean, that's the secret sauce right there. But that's the Chevy Bolt. Have you driven a Bolt lately? Just curious.
No, the last time I drove one was at the launch event in San Jose or wherever that was, and I think that was 17, maybe something like that.
Cool.
It's been a while, but I left with a very good impression of that vehicle overall.
Let's run through some news. The Z06 is confirmed. To me, I feel like what you're seeing right now is, you referenced this a little bit with Mach 1, but if you're looking for sort of peak analog, cars, that's what we're seeing right now. And that's why the Z06 is still a thing. So, there's a teaser, they put out some audio about it. I mean, this sounds like the Z06, let's put it that way.
Yeah, it does. I'm excited about that. And it's really good timing for GM too, especially we just talked about the GT350 exiting the market. That was the attainable flat plane V8 for the US market, essentially. And I mean, there's some other manufacturers that do. I mean, Ferrari, of course, but you're getting way the heck out there. But, Mercedes AMG's new V8s utilize that same design. But those are not, affordable. And it's not that the Z06 is cheap or that the GT350 was particularly cheap either, but they're certainly cheaper. And it's kind of nice to see something that cool, especially if this ends up being perhaps the last just straight up internal combustion engine Corvette. That's a nice note to go out on, I think. So that's pretty exciting.
We had rumors this week that the Kia Stinger might be done, which is a little surprising. It's not all that old of a car. However, it's using a very legacy, body styling, a sedan, kind of a fastback, which I think looks really nice. We had a long-term Stinger a few years ago. I really enjoyed it. Fun car to drive. Interior was creative. It was aggressive. I actually went to when they revealed the Stinger. I believe it was technically a concept. I want to say it was at the Detroit Auto Show, 15, 16, somewhere in there. I don't know. Again, this is kind of a rumor. I hope they don't get rid of it. I will say this, any decision to get rid of a sedan, however, is pretty defensible right now, though.
Yeah, and sadly, but it's one of those situations where the volumes aren't there. And I was reading a quote that I see used in various contexts, and I always forget who it's from. But the trick to solving a car that sells at a loss is not to sell more of them. So it's one of those things where you don't make up for lack of margin with volume, essentially. And the Stinger's got neither of those going for it, which is unfortunate because it is so nice to drive. But it's one of those where, as upsetting as it might be, I have a hard time believing that it's going to last too much longer.
You got to make tough decisions, and that's the kind of it was the vehicle that I think Kia used to kind of build their image a little bit, design, power, the sporty type, just idea that Kia is a sporty brand. They really got into racing, around that same time. And it did what it had to do in that sense. And, maybe that's what the Stinger was. It'll be an interesting collector car. Maybe not collector car, but a very interesting used car. That's for sure, as time goes on.
Absolutely.
So speaking of cars that are, well, this one is dead. I can't say back from the dead. I was at a virtual press conference this morning with Stellantis CEO Carlos Tavares. And, they kind of went around, they queued up the questions. And the one I put in, and this is actually my go-to question, in certain settings, if you will. This as well as I do. You can't just be if you want to be a credible journalist, the guy who just jumps up and asks gotcha questions or hey, tell me about this new secret car, comment on it. But there is a time and a place when you never know when somebody might answer something. And this call was, more of a business kind of group of journalists round table. I thought, well, I could kind of sneak in a product one. And I don't know the next time I'm going to get any sort of sit down with Carlos Tavares, virtual or otherwise. So it's what the hell? So I submitted, could the Viper come back as an EV, which seems to be, I'll admit that is a little bit of a, hey, pie in the sky, tell us about your future product. His answer was, well, something to the extent of Challenger or Charger, sure. And he kind of just punted on the rest. The way he phrased it, it didn't even sound like it was something they're working on, I guess I'll say this. He didn't say no, but
right.
It wasn't one of those where it was even it was definitely more of he demurred. It was kind of a bemused, okay, sure, guy brings up the Viper. That's a long-winded way, again, of saying, I really think there'd be a place for the Viper in a reborn Dodge. I think they should definitely make it a Dodge. It was like an SRT for a minute. Because you don't have to invest in some of the things that you needed to. Originally it was a V10 truck engine, but now it's and they modified over the years some of the things they had to do to get it right. But it does seem like everybody and their brother is making a lightweight electric sports car. Why not? That's my thought, Dip into somebody's architecture. What's the Maserati MC20? You guys are owned by the same family. Steal that,
Right.
So I don't know. I also like the Viper. It's a car that I think for people of a certain age, it really deeply resonates. Whenever I drove one, it was holy crap, this is really something. I don't think I would ever own one just because it's so much work to drive and then maintain. And the other thing is, some people may want the Viper just to ride out is what it was, and you don't want it to be an EV. But I don't know. What do you think?
I can see both sides of it. I'm a big Viper fan. I always have been. I've been casually shopping for Gen 2 Vipers for a while now. I would love to get a later model with the ABS and the hardtop, not an RT10. But the market for that has gone crazy over the past year. So the opportunities that were there even 12 months ago have kind of vanished, which makes it tricky. But I mean, I love them. But I was at the same time like, when there were rumors that the last gen Viper was kind of on the chopping block before we actually found out it was toast, I was very much of the impression that a V8 Viper could have made a big deal. Like it could have shown up and been the car that kind of stole a little volume away from Corvette and would have been a lot cheaper than FCA to produce. And I think it was kind of a missed opportunity. Like, it sat right there in front of them. Would have been an excuse for them to develop an aluminum version of one of the Hemi V8s, which, they could have then put into the Charger and Challenger and even some of these Rams, save a little weight, improve fuel economy, all those kinds of things. But obviously it never happened. Now, a lot of Viper people are super purist on the V10 thing, and I get it. I mean, that was one of the things that made the car special when it was new and kept it that way for a long time. But, at some point you have to decide which cow is most sacred. And, if the fact that we never got a V8 is why we don't have a Viper anymore, then we've lost. That's a net negative, in my opinion. So as much as it's a Viper guy thing to say, like, yeah, it should have gone out on the V10. I'm glad it's dead and it didn't turn into some wimpy electric car. Whatever. Like, it was an amazingly cool car. It could still be an amazingly cool car. It doesn't matter whether it's got a V10 or not. Just, you make a Viper that feels like a Viper in that kind of you're not entirely certain you have control of it even when it's not moving kind of way, and people will buy it. And you can do that with electric just fine. It's not all about the noise. In fact, the noise was probably one of the things about that car that was least impressive. I mean, for a V10, it was fairly unremarkable. A lot of people used to compare it to a UPS truck. So, the one thing that I think you're really losing there isn't that big of a loss. So I'm with you. I think it would be cool to see it come back. It was an icon. It's got, connections to so much of America's racing history, and, was really like the rad, fast car of America. I mean, there's really nothing. You can look at the Vet. The Vet was old at that point, right? I mean, it was like, oh, okay, another Corvette. And the C4 Corvette especially had a bad run in the 80s dealing with the emissions compliance and all that kind of stuff. And they had those sad versions of the 350. And so, the 90s rolled around and Chrysler was like, hey, look what we can do. And it would be great to see Stellantis say, hey, look what we can do, and bring that magic back again. But I'm not optimistic that they would do it, unfortunately. I think it would be cool, but
yeah, I mean, I do think when you look at the final Vipers, if you will, they were probably closer even to some of those early 90s Vipers in terms of like ride quality, drivability, than anything that, frankly, even the most extreme modern enthusiast would probably put up with. Like launching a new Viper in 2024, I mean, you'd have to make it much more livable to cater to make it like a poor man's Ferrari or Lamborghini or something, or an upgrade from the Vet or something. Like, I don't necessarily see that opportunity really existing in the market anymore, especially at that price point. Again, I love the Viper, but there were compromises to it. There were things that would make it very tough to be a modern vehicle, if you will. Like, it would have to be a clean sheet design that looked like a Viper that had some batteries. Yeah. So we'll see.
Yeah.
So speaking of batteries, Tesla is opening up its Supercharger network to non-Teslas, which is actually a pretty big step forward for our nation, if you will, because they actually probably have the best network right now. As far as, if you need to, I almost said gas, power up your car, you're much more likely to encounter one of those, especially depending on where you live. There's some nuance to this. Maybe you can explain it better than I can, though.
Well, I mean, it's one of those things where this is kind of the last really killer edge Tesla has left. I mean, they have obviously a lot of momentum that the other automakers don't have yet when it comes to actually mass producing electric cars that people want to buy. Not just producing them, but actually selling them. And so, we have a big enthusiastic fan base like that. That's great. But the problem is, like, the Supercharger network is kind of like the last thing that really differentiates Tesla. Because the other things, like, we've got powerful EVs coming from various manufacturers. We've got good range coming from various manufacturers. We've got arguably better design, higher quality interiors, over-the-air updates. All the things that used to make Tesla different are kind of being eroded now by the progress of other manufacturers. One thing that they could just hang their hat on no matter what was the Supercharger network. And in my mind, the only reason they're doing this is because the feds, we'll say the feds, because in general it's probably going to be the federal government level that's going to influence this the most, are pushing for more subsidies on open electric charging infrastructure, not closed charging infrastructure. So Tesla's two choices are either open up the garden and let everybody play and keep the money coming in, or keep it shut and eliminate a revenue source. Revenue, we'll call, it's, basically taxpayer money, but eliminate an option for them to have cash, because what they're relying on right now really is selling emissions credits, which, FCA, now Stellantis, is and has been probably their biggest customer by far. I'm not sure if that's necessarily true for the past 18 months, but it was for a very long time. And with Stellantis moving toward this nice, robust, long-term electrification platform, that's not something that Tesla is going to be able to rely on much longer. So since Tesla does not actually make a profit building and selling cars, dirty secret, they need another way to make money, or at least reduce their own cash bleed or offset it, if you want to look at it that way. So opening up the networks and collecting government subsidies that way, while they're also lobbying for more purchase incentives, is, it's just a smart move for them. But the existing customer base is going to be upset because, they're letting the unwashed masses into Tesla's playground, and that's going to upset people.
There's a lot of sides to this from the Tesla side of it, if you will, because I could honestly see if you were Elon Musk and you somebody asked you, hey, is this what you really want to do? He would probably say, no, I'd rather keep doing my own network, incentivize me. And hey, I was first. Agreed. Toyota and General Motors and Volkswagen haven't done this, but you're the federal government. You want to come in, you want to say, hey, what's the best way we could do it? Well, here's this more broader thing. It's going to apply to everybody, but it really impacts Tesla the most because, again, they're the only ones that really have their own network. So I could see it from a variety of viewpoints. As an electric consumer, which someday I assume I will be, sure, this makes more sense for me. I don't care. I take a very neutral approach. You just want to charge your car. I don't care if Tesla makes money or doesn't make money, but if there's a supercharger station on my corner, that's good for me, and at the end of the day, that's kind of how I think you got to look at it from an ownership perspective.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. And it said it, so in his tweet, Elon Musk said that it's starting with America and then it will happen in other markets eventually, I think was the word he used. But they didn't really cover in any of this, and I don't believe has come out of any follow-up, not that anyone ever actually gets to ask Tesla a follow-up question, but there hasn't really been any clear indicator whether there will be parity for Tesla owners versus non-Tesla owners. If you're if you roll up in a Chevy Bolt and say, are you paying the same amount for charging as the Tesla owner? Do you have to pay extra for adapters because Tesla has its own plug? Do you have to pay a subscription for this? Because if that's a question even for Tesla buyers, early on, Supercharger access was free. With the later, higher volume, cheaper models, that's no longer the case. So we don't really know if it's going to be truly equal access. Or, I could even see Tesla maybe setting up a queuing or reservation system where if you're a Tesla owner, you can claim a charger before you even arrive there. And someone who shows up while you're still en route just has to park and wait because the charger won't activate for you because it's already reserved for a Tesla owner. So, yeah, I still see opportunities here for Tesla to kind of assert their dominance over the space that they have worked so hard to build. And to their credit, they did work hard to build it. It's one of those things where I'd like to see more incentive for manufacturers and for businesses in other fields to do this kind of thing where, yes, it's great that you built the infrastructure, but it'll be better for everybody, yourself included, in the long run if it's publicly accessible. So, I mean, it's going to be interesting and important thing to follow over the next couple of years as this rolls out.
I mean, infrastructure really is the next like frontier here as far as making EVs adopted in a more mainstream fashion. If there were more like power stations that you could get, I think more people, it would just be like higher in the public awareness that you're, like if you just drove the 7-Eleven and there was a charging station next door, that would help.
Yeah.
As it is, I still think EVs get kind of put in this kind of niche space. We'll see. It's a little weird because it's almost like your iPhone doesn't charge the same way your Pixel, your Android phone does. But all that is like a minor annoyance that you can overcome. This is like people's cars. This is commutes. This is like, it's a much broader question. And I feel like it's also a very 2021 question. In 2030, the infrastructure is going to be totally different. There's going to be an entirely different layout. My guess is that it could be competing infrastructures. It could be there's some national federal grid. Who knows? Maybe some company like Electrify America, probably not them, but somebody maybe just grows up and like that's their thing, is they just build a bunch of power stations, own the grid.
Yeah.
You'd have more power than the car companies in some ways. Bad pun, but
right.
So, all right. So let's leave it there. Let's throw things back to the 80s. We're talking about a 1983 Ford Mustang 2.3-liter turbo. That's actually a side note to the Spend My Money. Daryl from Saskatchewan writes in that he's going to move to North Carolina. So that's his life update. His car update is he's looking to replace his 2002 Mazda Protege 5. He's had it for 13 years. That car doesn't owe you anything. That's pretty cool. Got some brake issues. It's time for him to look for new wheels to bring it together. Again, he's in kind of a weird situation because he's moving to North Carolina. So theoretically, you could get a car there or here. His wife and I don't have any children. The budget is $50,000. At some point, he wants to get a Miata. Truck or hatchback with a little bit more or similar storage to his Protege. So these are basically the criterias. The sort of, again, tangent, why I've been talking about Fox Body Mustangs since literally the top of the show, is his dad is looking at selling an 83 GT Turbo, which is kind of a rare car. It's a 2.3-liter turbo. It does not have an intercooler. He gives me a little mini history lesson and says it's kind of the predecessor to the SVO. Very cool. It's coming up to the end of its many-year rebuild. But sounds like his dad is looking to maybe, sell it to him. So I think that just kind of factors into this. Criteria for just all of this, if you will. Reasonable fuel economy, EV would be ideal, reliable, hatch or truck bed, some towing, accessibility for her without like a ladder. So, okay. For his wife, he mentions, who he says is a little bit short. So those are the criteria. Let's see what else here. Current options: F-150 Lightning, Kia Stinger, well, get one quickly. RAV4 Prime, Ioniq 5, Kia EV6, Ford Maverick, used Model S, Model Y, and that about sums it up. I think I hit everything there. A little bit of a long one. He has put a reservation in on the Lightning, so which is the exception to the ability for his wife to get up into the truck. So I'm out of breath. We're going to do what we normally do in two-man podcast, which is kick it over to you while I get an oxygen mask here.
Get yourself a drink of water. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going completely off the grid with this one. Well, I guess not completely off the grid, but out of his list of current things, I'm going to throw out a Volvo's V60 with the T8 powertrain. So if you bought one brand new, it would be out of the budget. It would be in the 60s, I think, and it would be called the Recharge because that's what Volvo rebranded those two. The beauty of something like this is it ticks your PHEV box. It's still a fun car to drive. It's a little heavy, but I mean they're still quite sporty. They're quite pleasant. You can get I think they have the Polestar engineered suspension upgrade available for those. So I mean, can't go wrong with that. tons of practicality. And if you decide to expand your family down the road, then you got room for kids. Probably no more than 2, even if it is a wagon. But still, it's a nice little compact wagon. Still fun. The S60 that we had as a long-term car had that T8 powertrain. It wasn't the most refined thing in the world, but it was a joy to drive, honestly. And that thing performed a lot better than it had any right to, considering how heavy it was, thanks to the battery pack and the all-wheel drive. But I think that would be my choice here. See if I get one of those, maybe CPO. Although, granted, right now the market's crazy, so who knows what you can easily find. But under normal circumstances, I think that would be like a lock from me. Like, good balance of a little bit of everything you want. And I think Volvo even rates them to tow, but I'm not entirely certain. And I know that was one of his kind of like would be nice criteria. So, hey, why not?
That is a very learned, nuanced option. I think when you went off the grid, I'm thinking, where's he going with this? But, we've actually been talking about the plug-in Volvos as good options for just, a variety of spend my monies. So I think, again, they're quality looking vehicles, nice interiors. They certainly could work for you. I'm going to go with the Lightning here, primarily because it's such a screaming deal right now. Especially if you want to get like a lower spec model, you can still get some of the tax incentives on it. I mean, to me, it's just a screaming deal. I think it looks great. If you have a reservation for it, I honestly, off the top of my head, I don't know what the backlog is looking like for that. I've been so like into like the Bronco reservation bank that, and they have, I believe it's 125,000. I don't think it's quite as extreme for the F-150. But, I mean, that's where I would land. And the other thing I would say is like the RAV4 Prime, which was on this list, is a pretty good deal as well. It's a little bit smaller. But, if you're going to go into like SUV territory, I mean, I think that could work for you as well. You're looking at like, I believe a range of like 42 miles, just of pure EV range. So for like this time and space, that's pretty good.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That'd be my second choice, I think. The EV6 and the Ioniq 5, I don't know. I haven't driven either of those two cars. I don't think anybody's actually driven the EV6 or the Ioniq 5 for that matter. So I don't really have a great feel for those. That is definitely going into like a full plug-in lifestyle, as you are with the Lightning, but it's an F-150. I really feel like, if you're going to looking at it logically and also a little bit like, hey, which would be pretty fun, let lightning strike, if you will. So, and then it sounds like he's going to get a Miata at some point. And then this 83 Mustang is out there. I would say take the Mustang. I feel like, you're not going to regret getting your dad's, restored Mustang. I feel like that's one of those things that you might regret if you don't take it. You know what I mean? Like, God,
Yes.
I wish I could have had that car. And you can always still pick up a Miata down the road.
Absolutely.
So
I say that as
that's
a
how I
Miata
would do
owner, like absolutely just, I mean, they built a ton of Miatas. They sold a ton of Miatas. There will always be a Miata out there. Maybe not, a 92, early first gen in immaculate condition for a reasonable price, because that ship is basically already sailing. And if you're not, running down the pier right now, you're going to miss it. So, just the beautiful thing about the Miatas, there really is no bad Miata, and they've been building them for 30 years. So, you know what? Take your time, get what you really want, take up that opportunity to get that Ford. I think having that 2.3 liter Mustang will be a blast. And you know what? If it turns out it doesn't suit your lifestyle, it'll be really easy to sell because it's already a collector's item. So you know what? You're not gonna you basically be parking money in it if you end up getting it. So
I think we're seeing the Fox body Mustangs are starting to, like you said, they're collector's pieces at this point. We're seeing those values start to go up. The 5.0s are obviously the red-blooded, machines that, you're going to want. But the 2.3 is kind of it was lower volume for 83. It's little, it's a rare bird, if you will. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So, I mean, plus I'm really coming around to the Fox body Mustang. We had an 83 growing up. It was just like kind of a hatchback thing. At the time, it was just like, my dad's car. And it's like, all right, whatever. I think it literally blew 2 transmissions in like 3 years and we got rid of it. So At the time, that generation of Mustang wasn't anything special. With time, I feel like they are. And I especially feel like some of the 5-liter ones, the SVO models, the ones even a little bit later into the life cycle where it seemed like they sort of toned down that front clip. The headlights got a little more squared off. And you saw this on certain of the more like the high performance models. The car really, I thought, looked muscular by the time it was ending its run in the 90s. So I'm starting to like the Fox body Mustang. So that's all the time we have this week. I think we hit a lot of things pretty thoroughly. What's next for your happy hour special there, Byron?
Honestly, I'm kind of spent. I don't know what's left. I think it might be a rum and coke kind of day. Okay,
sounds good. I think I might go with a Coors Light just because it's getting pretty hot. And yeah, we'll do that. So everybody be safe out there. Send us your spend my monies, your questions to podcast@autoblog.com. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week.